Why would we want people who are supporters of genocide to live? I'm confused.
Well, there's a very big difference when you're essentially a political cult and you can shout any slogan that you like because it has no public repercussions or reverberations.
When people talk about pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, what they really just mean is a narrative and an aesthetic. The history on the current events, and there is just the aesthetic.
And so you have to adjust to the new political reality that there are large numbers of people, probably a majority, who are potentially receptive to your message.
Anyway, Norman Finklestein delivered a speech at Columbia University, and I've said this a few times about Finklestein. He's a bit more complex than he lets off, I think. You would get the impression that he is just a hardliner on every position on Palestine, but he's actually not. I don't know if you noticed in the Rabbani Destiny Benny Morris conversation, he said that he believed that Arabs, Palestinians, should have accepted the UN partition plan. I think he said that it was like the right thing to do at the time, or the more practical thing to do at the time. But also, he is famously a two-stater. He's had run-ins with the BDS movement. He's had issues with full right of return, which is interesting because if he is going to be associating with the Columbia University guys, they were quite explicit that they don't allow that kind of diversity of opinion, or they don't care for it. I need to find it was their Instagram post, wasn't it? Yeah, this little guide for principled solidarity. And they say, we see through all opportunists and normalizers, and often a normalizer is not always, but often seen as people who are willing to settle for two states. That's so often seen as normalizers, especially like by the Hamas crowd. They call it tatbiya, or like it's like because they're the rejectionists. And this is like the Palestinian red lines, the non-negotiable nature of these principles. And one of them is actually right of return, which Finklestein will say that it should be recognized, the right of return. But Finklestein, I don't think, has ever supported the whole full 6 million people returning to exactly whichever bit of land they came from in 48. Jerusalem is the capital, self-determination. And then even here, when they talk about the myth of the two-state solution, they say it was a myth because it didn't include a full right of return. It included a partial right of return, like family reunification and resettlement for everyone else. It was like a right of return to Palestine because there was an unlimited right of return to Gaza and the West Bank. But they don't mean to Palestine. They mean to their particular homes, right? Their homes and villages, even if it's like rubble. So also, the two-state solution wasn't, I don't think the sticking point of the two-state solution was necessarily refugees. It seemed to be demilitarization from the population, at least according to polls, and it was more likely, like, it was more Jerusalem and the Temple Mount was like the big thing, but anyway. And then they talk about General Assembly resolution, which I guess they think is the same as international law. It's not. But here, talking about perfect victims, like, are you in solidarity or are you merely a sympathetic witness? There's like a very demanding, like, there's a lot of demand for lockstep. Like, we reject conditional solidarity. We reject normalizers trying to tell us to make our rhetoric more palatable. This is from SJP Columbia. And when Finklestein went there, though, apparently he did actually suggest that they be more palatable, among other things. So let's just see the talk and see how it goes.
Professor Norman Finklestein joined us today to show support for this movement, to support everyone here against the oppression of Columbia University. Please come closer. Please come closer as Professor Norman Finklestein gives his remarks to everyone here.
34 minutes. We're going to have to speed him up.
The Columbia University Apartheid Divest movement on campus that has now inspired a big movement across U.S. universities. So let me introduce Professor Norman Finklestein.
In my youth, when I was roughly your age, or actually your age,
I was what was called back in the day, I was a Maoist, a follower of Chairman Mao in China. And one of the slogans which he was famously associated with him was the slogan, unite the many to defeat the few. And that means at any juncture in a political struggle, you have to figure out how can you unite the many and isolate the few with a clear objective in mind. Obviously, you don't want to unite the many for with a goal or an objective, which is not your objective. So you have to figure out, having your objective in mind, what is the slogan which will work the best to unite the many and defeat the few. I was gratified that the movement as a whole, shortly after October 7th, spontaneously, intuitively, they grasped the right, in my opinion, the right slogan. And the slogan was, ceasefire now.
Okay.
Now, some of you might think in retrospect, well, what was so brilliant about that slogan? Wasn't it obvious? But in fact, political slogans are never obvious. There are all sorts of routes and paths and byways that people can go down, which are very, in my opinion, destructive to the movement. And I found the fact that it wasn't a leadership decision, I don't think. It was a spontaneous, intuitive sense by the protesters. The right slogan at this moment is ceasefire now. I would also say, in my opinion, I'm trying to discuss brass tacks, not high theory. In my opinion, the slogans have to be as clear as possible, leaving no room for ambiguity and no room for misinterpretation. A misinterpretation that's exploited to discredit a movement. So if you take the history of struggle, there was the famous slogan going already back to the late 1800s, the 8-hour working day. It was a clear slogan. You want an 8-hour working day. And more recently, in your own living memory, for all the disappointments, in my opinion, of the Bernie Sanders candidacy, I do believe one of the geniuses of his candidacy, for all the disappointment, was because he had 40, 50 years of experience on the left end of the political spectrum for all. Now, you might think, what's so smart about that slogan? It was a very good slogan. He knew that he could reach, using Chairman Mao's, not concept, but Chairman Mao's political insight. He knew he could reach 80% of Americans with that slogan. That slogan was going to resonate with 80% of the American people. He knew abolish student debt, free college tuition. It was going to resonate with a large part of his potential constituency. He didn't go beyond what was possible at that particular moment. He didn't go beyond it, but I do think he reached what you might call the political limit. The limit at that point in his candidacy was roughly jobs for all, public works program, Green New Deal, Medicare for all, abolish student debt, and free college tuition. Those were the right slogans. And as I say, it may seem trivial, but it really is not.
By the way, he's obviously delivering this message to people who are saying like this kind of shit, right? You don't have a culture, go back to Europe, all you do is colonize. They're shouting Yahudi, which means Jew.
Stop killing children!
Oh Hamas, oh loved one, hit or strike Tel Aviv. It's like, and we also have, this is just the other day, the New York Times even covering this person. This one of the student protest leaders is this non-binary student who goes by, was it he, she, they pronouns? Just so you guys know. Yeah, in a talk saying that Zionists don't deserve to live. Be grateful that I'm not just murdering Zionists. I think this is the clip, right? Oh, it's just a Twitter link. The Daily Wire, obviously, having a field day with this.
Overall world to be a winner. Meet up.
Where is it?
I fight to injure or for there to be a winner or a loser. I fight to kill.
So
Where was the
do you
clip?
see anywhere?
I don't want to watch the whole 6 minutes again. I just want to find the right bit. Hitler needed to die. Hate and slaves kill their masters.
Supremacist. And so
Zionists are the white
let's be very
supremacists.
clear here. I'm not saying that I'm gonna go out and start killing Zionists.
Obviously.
What I'm saying is that if an individual who identifies as a Zionist threatens my physical safety in person, i.e. puts their hands on me, I'm going to defend myself. And in that case scenario, it may come to a point where I don't know when to stop. Does that make sense? There should not be Zionists anywhere. Zionists are Nazis.
Anyway.
For my identity as a black queer woman in New York City, obviously, if I'm on the train and I'm sexually assaulted or harassed in some way, like I may say I slap somebody, right? Doing and saying that versus saying that, you know, you fight to kill. And you made a comment earlier where you stated that you may not know your own strength behind why, or you may not have the resistance to stop, right? That is kind of like what I'm taking from what you were sharing, that it could get to that point.
Okay, both of them have taken a break, everyone. So these are two black women. I just wanted to throw that out there. So I'm not too keen on going to, but yeah, these are two black women in the meeting, just in case y'all couldn't tell already. But these are two black women. The meeting's a joke. They definitely were hoping that I was gonna walk back the I fight to kill. Your initial letter from your office mentioned that this meeting will determine if it needs to reach or go to a disciplinary hearing. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'll be being notified about in 24 to 48 hours.
That, and it can also be that we need additional information. All of our letters are standard, so it depends on kind of like everything that you discussed us and what we discussed.
Right. Okay then, well thank you.
No problem.
A lot of people agree that Hitler needed to die in order for world order to move forward and in order to establish some inkling of world peace. And so if we can agree as a society, as a collective, that some persons need to die if they have an ideology that results in the death of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, if there are people like that who exist, shouldn't they die? Why would we want people who are supporters of genocide to live? I'm confused. Zionists, along with all white supremacists, need to not exist.
And just remember, it's not difficult to fall under this kind of person's radar and get flagged as a pro-genocide Zionist, right? You don't actually have to do that much to get that stamp on you, right? To get that target on your back.
Because they actively kill and harm vulnerable people. They stop the world from progressing. Oh, okay. Thank you. What? Thank you. And so be glad, be grateful that I'm not just going out and murdering Zionists. I've never murdered anyone in my life, and I hope to keep it that way.
Yeah, you just want other people to do it for you, you fucking retard. Yeah, well done. You cowardly fuck at your fucking $80,000 a year, whatever, at university. It's very easy for you. Probably, I don't know, does this person really think they're not going to get any repercussions for this if they're like a student at this university and they're broadcasting themselves publicly saying this shit? But yeah, obviously, like, you just want all the Zionists to stop existing, but, you know, just someone else do it for me, please, you know, because I gotta get my degree and move on to some humanities fucking course or become a lecturer or some shit, right? Okay.
The meeting was so done. I actually kind of hope they do kick me out because I've been meaning to travel to South America.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. Zionists need to die. I'm not gonna do it though because I need to go backpacking in the fucking Amazon.
The United States would never support the murder of Netanyahu, but imagine how many lives would be saved if possibly, right? Because we all know that the replacement will probably, but, you know, philosophically speaking, the death of I
think, was it Finklestein said to be clear? Be clear in your goals? It's like, okay. I mean, this is kind of clear.
A maniacal genocidist like Netanyahu in Israel. His death would theoretically mean that many people would live. Zionists, they don't deserve to live comfortably, let alone Zionists don't deserve to live. The same way we're very comfortable accepting that Nazis don't deserve to live.
Okay, I feel like they made the point, right? There's not much ambiguity there, anyway. So, Norman, you were talking about clear messaging that can't be weaponized by your opponents so easily. Okay.
It's a lot of hard work and a lot of sensitive.
Also, ceasefire. A slight contradiction going on there. These two recommendations are at odds with one another. Uh-oh.
To the constituency that you're trying to reach to figure out the right slogans. I am my own view, and I'm going to stop at this point. My own view is some of the slogans of the current movement don't work because they leave, in my opinion, but you guys, the future belongs to you, not to me. And I am a strong believer in democracy with a small d. You have to decide for yourselves. But in my view, you've got to pick the slogans, A, which are not ambiguous, leaving no wiggle room for misinterpretation, and B, have the largest likelihood at any given political moment to reach the largest number of people. That's my, I don't want to call it advice, because I'm not here to give advice, that's my political experience. And at this point, I'm happy to hear from you and to get some clarity on what's going on at Columbia University right now. Since, as I said, everything has been mediated by the media, except for the hearings, which I did watch from start to finish. Thank you.
Just for everyone to know, Professor Finklestein will be at Columbia on Monday from 7 to 9, and at CIBA building we will announce about that later, so you can attend there and ask more questions. But now I think Professor has some time to take a few questions from you, and then we will have another speaker.
Yes, I think the wise thing to do is to form a line here so you can use the microphone as well.
So I just wanted to ask, out of all our slogans, which one stands out to you the most, and which one do you think resonates with many?
Obviously, as I've already said, I believe the ceasefire now slogan is the most important. I would say on a college campus, that slogan should be twinned.
I agree, actually. That would be that's definitely the most honorable protest slogan to put out. Yeah.
With the slogan of free speech, which resonates on a college campus. So I would, if I were in your situation, I would say free Gaza, free speech. That should be the slogan. Because I think on a college campus, people have a real problem defending the repression of speech. Now, I recognize that in recent years, because of the emergence of the identity politics, cancel culture ambiance on college campuses, the whole issue of free speech and academic freedom has become severely, let's call it, clouded by that movement. I have opposed any restrictions on free speech, and I've opposed the identity politics, cancel culture on the grounds of preserving free speech.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, not as a point of pride or egotism, or to say I told you so, just as a factual matter. In the last book I wrote, I explicitly said in the book, you can find it for those of you who are interested, I explicitly said that if you use the standard of hurt feelings as a grounds to stifle or repress speech, then Israeli students will say that when Palestinians protest this, that, or the other, they are going to use the claim of hurt feelings, pained emotions, and that whole language and vocabulary, which is so easily turned against those who have been using it in the name of their own cause. That was a disaster waiting to happen. I wrote about it because I knew what would happen, though obviously I couldn't have predicted the scale after October 7th. But it was perfectly obvious what was going to happen. In my opinion...
Israeli students, this college is in America. He just means Jews. Probably, but you can be an Israeli and go and study in America. What?
The most powerful weapon you have, the most powerful weapon is the weapon of truth and justice. And you should never create a situation where you can be...
You know what, though? There is always a thing with the media and how much they're capturing and how much is actually going on. And I always do feel like it's really hard to get an actual, fully rounded opinion on what's actually happening at these protests, because all you are seeing is clips from a very long period of protests and from a lot of interactions and a lot of talks and a lot of people there. I wonder, unless you can poll the people who are there, but honestly, part of me just feels like I want to go there myself and just walk around and just talk to people at random and just see what I find, you know? And honestly, if I was in a more privileged position, like an 80K a year student, incidentally, then I probably would have done that. Do some street interviews. Hassan was there yesterday. Well, he didn't take me, so.
Silence on the grounds of feelings and emotions. If you listen, which all of you did, if you listen to President Stefanik's remarks, it was all about hurt feelings, feeling afraid. That whole language has
The
completely
problem is the only clips you see are the ridiculous people. That can get you so far, but that doesn't get you past the fact that there are people who are literally being invited to do talks who are holding some of these some of the most fringe opinions, or that person that we just watched was a leader. Was it apparently like that's what they've been called in the New York Times or anything else? They're called like a leader of the student movement here, so or one of the leaders. So it's not like they're just a random punter who turned up there, as well as some of the lectures. And if you look at some of the chants, again, even if the chants are only 12 or 10, 15, 20, 30 people, it's more than that. That's still kind of alarming, no? For that level of rhetoric. Can you imagine if there were 30 Nazis running around talking about telling Jews to go back to Europe and shit like that? Or, yeah, I guess they would just say, go to Israel or just die, go back into the chambers. Or instead of bomb Tel Aviv, it was what, like... Yeah, just gas the Jew. Like, I don't know. I feel like even a small group doing that without any apparent objection from the other people seems to be a kind of worrying. Like, it seems to just be something that makes you think what everyone else there is actually okay with, or whether they know, or whether they care, or whether they're just quietly opposing it because they're scared. Like, you just don't know.
completely corrupted the notion of free speech and academic freedom. And you have now...
I mean, you know what they say, guys. You know what they say. If there's one Nazi at a 10-person table... Just saying.
that experience, and hopefully going forward, that language and those concepts will be jettisoned from a movement that calls itself as belonging to, if I can use the expression...
How much would it cost you for flights, accommodation, and just general living expenses being there? I'd also have to get equipment for street interviews. So microphone, got a camera. I mean, $3,000, yeah. I was going to say 2,000, but then that would probably mean I'd be going into dipping out of pocket. And that would be to stay there for what, like 3 or 4 days at most? Laptop? I don't even have a laptop. Let's make it 5,000, 10,000. Give me $20,000, guys, or I'll do it, okay? $25,000. You'll get me over there. I'll do it, okay? Sorted.
A leftist tradition. It's a complete catastrophe when that kind of language is infiltrated.
Then I'll think about it.
You can call it a hate expression, but leftist discourse. When that language is infiltrated, it's, in my view, a catastrophe. As you're seeing now, even this notion that I don't agree with the slogan. I'm going to be candid with you, and I don't make any claim to infallibility. I'm simply stating, based on my long experience in politics, I don't agree with the slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's very easy to amend and just say, from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free. And that simple amendment, that little amendment.
That's because he doesn't support a one-state solution. Because he's consistent. International law. Well, whatever he thinks international law is. Obviously, he ignores a few international laws. But yeah, the existence of Israel is right by international law. So he's taking the Mandela position. He's sticking by his 90s boomer sensibilities. Do you know what's so ironic then? It's that in terms of political outcome for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, his position on what the final settlement should be is basically the same as Destiny's. Apart from, I think, Norman would allow for a few more refugees to go to Israel. This is what I mean when I say pro-Palestine, pro-Israel. Like, really, you're either both or you're neither, really. Like, and what I mean by that is that if you're pro-Palestine and Israel, that generally means two states. But I think it also means like the only workable form of a one-state solution, which would be a binational solution, because these two groups are different. They want to do society in different ways. They need different protections. They need to make sure that one can't just use any demographic majority they ever have to oppress the other. And again, like Jews could do that to Arabs as well. Like they have done that in the past. So like it would be either. Like, but if you're just pro-Palestine and like you want to get rid of Israel, well then you just want a war until one group dies, which is probably going to be the Palestinians because they would lose that war, unfortunately, you know? So it's like, the fact is that there are two national groups there and neither of them are moving. That's why both sides actually does matter, because if you don't factor in the concerns and the trauma and the like the culture or the just every aspect about either of those two, about both of those two groups, then you're kind of fucked. If you're pro-Israel, it's a bit easier because a fully pro-Israel person who doesn't believe in a Palestinian state, it's easy enough for them because they just keep the status quo or just keep on kicking the can down the road until eventually a Palestinian state is impossible. People just give up and leave, or they stay in a kind of permanent limbo, right? A permanent quasi-autonomous limbo, like fucking West Bank. Yeah. So that's how I see it. And that's also why when people talk about pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, what they really just mean is it's like a narrative and an aesthetic. There are different narratives on the history. There are different narratives on the current events. And there is just the aesthetic, who you talk, like what talking points you find more important, which parts of the history you find more important, which side you're more willing to give benefit of the doubt to, which side you're less likely to fact check, which side you're more likely to fight against. That's really what it means. But as far as actually what you want for the end state of things in that area, you can have seemingly the two of the loudest pro-Palestine, pro-Israel voices on the internet, and they both support, it seems, a two-state solution without full right of return, like Finklestein and Destiny. Like, how weird is that? Yeah, I don't think enough people think about that or notice that.
Drastically reduce the possibility of being manipulatively misunderstood. But when I was hearing that this slogan causes pain, anguish, fear, I have to ask myself a simple question. What is the slogan, "We support the IDF"? What does that convey? The IDF right now, Israeli Defense Forces, it is a genocidal army. Why are you allowed to have public support for a genocide, at this moment, a genocidal state and a genocidal army?
Well, you mean a plausibly genocidal state, Norman Finkelstein, come on.
Okay, the language doesn't seem as provocative, "We support the IDF," but the content is 10,000 times more offensive and outrageous to any, so to speak, civilized mind and civilized heart than the "From the river to the sea" slogan. And the only reason there is an argument about that slogan, even though, as I said, I disagree with it, but that's a separate matter, whether I agree or disagree with it. The only reason there is an argument about that slogan is because we have legitimized this notion that hurt feelings are grounds for stifling speech. And that, to me, is totally unacceptable. It's wholly alien to the culture of academic freedom, which some of you might say, oh, that's such a bourgeois notion, it's socially constructed, and all that other crap. I don't believe that at all. You will be the most eloquent defenses of the principle of unhindered, untrammeled freedom of
speech. Is this what his neighbors were chanting? Maybe in his imagination.
You'll read the most eloquent defenses of it by people like Rosa Luxemburg, who was, by any reckoning, an ordinary individual and extraordinary revolutionary. But being both did not in any way mean she would accept any curves on the principle of free speech. Free speech for two reasons. Number one, no radical movement can make any kind of progress unless it has clarity about its goals and clarity about what it might be doing that's wrong. You're always engaging in course corrections. Everybody makes mistakes. You constantly have to engage in course corrections.
Do you think things are slowly becoming more pro-Hamas than just pro-Palestine? I don't think I'm not anywhere near a position where I would say that broadly. I think we're more moving into a position where, with the caveat, that people are unwittingly doing that. At least it's more, I don't think it's majority pro-Hamas. It's more pro-Hamas than I've ever seen Western pro-Palestinian sentiment. It's like what we saw with the Matt Binder conversation, where he was saying he condemns Hamas like a million times, like no apologies or anything like that. And his chat were saying the same thing, but every time he was brought up with an example of pro-Hamas chants by groups of people, he was just very dismissive. I think most people just don't want to believe it's as prevalent as it is. And the fact that it's from people who are literally like held up as prominent figures of the movement, like that student leader or the lecturers or the organizers for that Student Justice Palestine group. I don't know why that name is just not sinking in. What are they called? SJP, yeah, Columbia Students for Justice in Palestine. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Corrections. And unless you have free speech, you don't know what you're doing that's wrong. And number two, the truth is not an enemy. The truth is not an enemy, in my view. It's not an enemy to oppressed peoples, and it's certainly not an enemy to the people of Gaza. And so we should maximize our commitment to free speech so as to maximize the dissemination of what's true about what's happening in Gaza, and not allow any excuse for repressing that truth. That's how I see it. I think if you could just come up. Thank you.
Hi, Vanessa Finklestein. So based on what you just said, so my professor, Joseph Massad, he always says that terms don't come out of nowhere and phrases and meanings evolve.
See, this professor she just brought up, Joseph Massad, what was his thing again? Didn't he write in the Electronic Intifada on October 8th? I think this piece was openly fawning over Hamas, wasn't it? The sight of the Palestinian resistance fighters storming Israeli checkpoints separating Gaza from Israel was astounding, not only to the Israelis, but especially to the Palestinian Arab peoples who came out across the region to march in support of the Palestinians in their battle against their cruel colonizers. This is October 8th. This is after we knew the majority of the people that the Hamas were fighting against, that they were battling against. The people in the festival or the families in the kibbutzim, like, was that a battle against cruel colonizers? We wouldn't know because there's no mention actually of whether or not they considered the casualties by Hamas to be civilians or IDF. It's just colonizers. It's a catch-all term for all of them. You know, this person's a professor. And the horrifying human toll is obviously just the bombing of Gaza, the attack on Gaza. Nothing about the human toll of hostages or civilians being killed in Israel. Nothing. Like, this is a pro-Hamas article. Like, it just is. So she mentioned him as well. Okay. Her professor. Okay, what's he saying?
Over time, right? From the river to the sea was being said when I was a freshman here during the BDS referendum, and it was not being penalized or criminalized, and it was understood for what it was. It was being understood as an expressive statement that holds emotion and that holds deep meaning for a community, and that is also valuable to a protest. Like the human aspect of it. I feel like if we're all focused all the time on trying to communicate the message correctly to the United States government, which quite frankly I'm not sure how clear you have to be with them for them to do something, we're inherently repressing the human and emotional part of the protest. So I don't know, like, why do you think Free Palestine is not the correct statement? What is the correct statement? If Free Palestine is quite simple, and people who...
Free Palestine isn't what he said, because Free Palestine can mean Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem. It's still more vague, obviously, but I think that's why Finklestein said you can still say river to the sea, but he prefers it to be from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free, not Palestine, because Palestine makes you think one-state solution, river to the sea.
Are educated on the subject and who believe on the subject understand what it means. It means decolonize, it means liberate, it means don't place the blame on the people that didn't do anything. My question basically is, don't you think that conditioning speech in that way by not using those slogans, even though they hold meaning and they hold power for the community that is fighting for their own rights, don't you think it dehumanize the whole fight? And shouldn't that also be a part of student speech? That's it.
Well, I'm glad people challenge me. I think that's a useful thing. And I don't like to play to the choir. You're doing 10,000 things right, and it's deeply moving what you've achieved, what you've accomplished, and the fact that many of you are putting your futures on the line. That's very impressive. I remember during the anti-war movement, it was a different era, obviously, anti-war, the anti-Vietnam War movement. And I remember there were young people who wanted to go to medical school. And if you got arrested, you weren't going to medical school once you got that record. And I remember many people struggling with the choice between getting arrested for the cause And the cause was not abstract. It was, by the end of the Vietnam War, the estimates are just the Vietnamese, who leave aside Laotians and Cambodians, between 2 and 3 million Vietnamese were killed. It was an unfolding horror show every day. And people struggled with whether they would risk their entire futures. And many of you come from backgrounds where it was a real struggle to get to where you are today, Columbia University. So I deeply respect your courage, your conviction, and every opportunity when I speak. I acknowledge the incredible, really incredible conviction and tenacity of your generation, which in many ways is more impressive than my own, for the simple reason that in my generation, we can't deny the fact, I don't believe it's the total picture, but a significant aspect, I'm not going to say significant, an aspect of the anti-war movement was the fact that the draft weighed on a lot of people. You could get the student deferment for the 4 years that you're in college, but once the deferment passed, there was a good chance you were going over there and you were coming back in the body bag. So there was an element of selfishness, not in the bad sense selfishness, but an element of, let's say, self-concern. Whereas you young people, you're doing it for a tiny, stateless people halfway around the world. And that's deeply moving, deeply impressive, and deeply inspiring. And every time I join one of the demonstrations, I'm really, as I said, very moved by the energy, the tenacity of your generation. So with that as a long introduction, so let's get down to the question. And the question to me comes back to my very initial remarks. I said, any movement has to ask itself, what is its goal? What is its objective?
Good question.
What are they trying to achieve? Now, as the young woman said, can she just raise her hand? You don't want to give your name? It's okay if you don't. Okay, just the young woman. I don't want to get causing problems. Yes. As the young woman said, a few years ago, that was a slogan of the movement, from the river to the sea. I remember in the 1970s, one of the slogans was, everybody should know we support the PLO, which was not an easy slogan to shout on Fifth Avenue in the 1970s. I do vividly recall looking at the rooftops and waiting for the sniper to dispatch me to eternity at an early age. However, there's a very big difference when you're essentially a political cult and you can shout any slogan that you like because it has no public repercussions or reverberations. You're essentially talking to yourself. You're setting up a table on campus, giving out literature for Palestine. You might get 5 people who are interested. There's a very big difference between that situation and the situation in which you are today, where you have a very large constituency that potentially and realistically you can reach. And so you have to adjust to the new political reality that there are large numbers of people, probably a majority, who are potentially receptive to your message. Number 2, I completely understand what you're saying, that sometimes a slogan is one that gives spirit to those who are involved in the movement. And then you have to figure out the right balance between the spirit that you want to inspire in your movement and the audience or the constituency out there that's not part of the movement.
It's kind of funny that I feel like it's one of those things where if it was anyone other than Finklestein giving this argument, like just a random person, I feel like the response would be so much more hostile. Like he is basically going against at least what SJP were saying and what a lot of these professors were saying as well about like tone policing and perfect victim and all that stuff. I think he gets away with it though a little bit. Yeah. He has more clout license
that you want to reach. So if you're saying to me, I'm a killjoy by saying this, if we modify the slogan a little, it's not as much fun, I kind of get that. However, I do believe one has to exercise, not in a conservative sense, but in a radical sense. One has to exercise in a moment like this, if for no other reason than for the people of Gaza, one has to exercise maximum responsibility. Maximum responsibility to get out of one's navel, to crawl out of one's ego, and to always keep in mind the question, what are we trying to accomplish at this particular moment? That's my view.
Oh, they just cucked him. Oh well, he got absolutely cucked. But he has given his opinion on why he doesn't like the phrase. Yeah. So this is him talking about refugees first of all.
Israel's population is 7.
In 2012, but I don't. It's hard to tell if he's changed his position on this because I don't really. In the conversation with Benny Morris and Destiny and Moeen, it sounded like he was just talking about he kept on insisting the right, recognize the right. It's like, well, okay, but that sounds like you're saying you don't want a full right of return. You want, like, again, a limited right of return, which is not the same as what these organizers want, but yeah.
7.5 million. Of those 7.5 million, 5.5 million are Jewish. And the other 2 million are Palestinian, Arab, and other, neither of the above. And you say, as a lot of the solidarity movement says, all 6 million Palestinian refugees have to go back, okay? Now, will a public think it's reasonable for 6 million Palestinians to descend on a country which right now has 1.8 million Palestinians?
Like, how does he get away with descend on a country? That sounds like if I ever wanted to liken anti-right of return rhetoric to great replacement, descend on a country. Okay.
And 5.5 million Jews, which means you're going to completely overnight, radically, completely change the demographic balance in the country. Will a person, the public, find that reasonable? My answer is, you can give them every fact behind the creation of the refugees, and they'll still see the Israeli position that that's not tenable. I don't think you can sell it.
Well.
You want to say you're agnostic on Israel?
Oh, this is him talking about BDS, because the BDS organization that he's referring to here says they have 3 demands. One is equal right for Palestinians who live in Israel, equal rights. The second one is, what's the second one? I've forgotten. Self-determination, 6-7 borders. And the third one is right of return, like full right of return. So that basically means one state solution. It means 2 states in theory, but if you're doing full right of return, then it means really 2 states are going to have Palestinian majority populations, both of them. And they're just going to become one Palestinian state. That's like the idea. And when the BDS organization is asked, though, what their position in Israel is, because they basically want the destruction of Israel by the logical conclusion of what they're advocating for, they just say they're agnostic on Israel because they sell themselves as a human rights organization. This is the argument that he makes, is that they're about rights. We're about end the occupation, which is a human right, and right of return, which is a human right. What happens to Israel is not a human rights question, so they just leave it alone. Which Finklestein kind of calls out and says is a little bit snaky, basically, like not trustworthy, because obviously they have a position on Israel. If you believe that, you want there to be no Israel. Yeah.
You want to say you want one state? There's nothing in the international law for one state. You're not going to win a public to that. Once you step out of your little cult, your little ghetto, and you enter the real world, and you try to reach a broad public, and you say, we are a rights-based organization, which is what BDS likes to say, and we want to enforce our rights. Okay, the law. So once you step out of your ghetto, you're no longer just talking to yourself. There is the other side. They also make themselves heard. So they say, no, that's not true. They're lying. They say they want to enforce the law, but they really want to destroy Israel. They want to eliminate Israel. So now the public hears both sides. And they come back to the solidarity movement, and they say, is that true? You want to destroy Israel? And then the solidarity movement says, oh, we don't have a position on Israel. We don't take a position. Oh, really? You don't take a position on Israel? Well, then we're not going to take a position on BDS. The law is clear.
What was that zoom in?
You want to use the yes. The law is clear. You want to use the International Court of Justice on your side? Okay, the International Court of Justice, it said, the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, they are occupied Palestinian territories. That's correct. But the ICJ also said that pre-June 67 border is Israel's legal border. That's their country. That's the law. You want to promote one state? Fine, that's your right. But then don't pretend you're trying to enforce the law.
Ooh.
That's not true.
Why the clown face over that? That's true. Well, Mr. Finklestein. Yeah, how does he... Because I don't think I've ever seen a big renouncement of these opinions. I think he still holds these positions. It's just that he doesn't really talk about solutions these days. He just talks about inflammatory rhetoric, because that's, I guess, where the big bucks are. That's where the clout is at. That's where you get the support. That's where you get all the retweets and the likes. It's that whole despair thing. Don't talk about solutions or final settlements or any advancement forward. Just talk about how horrible everything is. Like fucking Lord, like, yeah, and just even say you think it's hopeless. So there's no point talking about solutions. Like Lord Denethor, just making up his mind that Faramir's definitely dead and just not taking it, and seeming to almost have like a sense of ecstasy about it. Yeah, okay, taking almost comfort in that fact. Oh, well. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting. It was interesting that he did that, and like, I guess they were happy to see Finklestein there, but obviously they just went against his advice like immediately after he finished speaking, even if it was cordial. But yeah, pretty wild. Pretty wild. More interested in memorializing Palestinians than help. Yeah, well, yeah, he does seem like he's more interested in... He even said that, though. He just like, he does this because he wants to have the record down. Like, he's more interested in writing the eulogy than he is in actually stopping him ever needing to do one. Yeah. See, the thing is, if I don't get to know these protesters, libs of TikTok will, and they'll do these stupid, I'll bet this is the most dramatic, thumping, overcompressed music ever is playing over this right now.
We are seeing huge protests across the Western world. Thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people organized with Palestinian flags, signs, and keffiyehs.
Yeah.
If many of these demonstrations and happenings do not feel organic or authentic,
She's a fucking robot. Go back to posting fucking tweets and with no commentary and just being like, look at this non-binary person with silly hair. You're not impressive. You're really fucking stupid. Anyway.
because they're not. So let's have a look at some of the donors, funders, and NGOs that are behind some of these increasingly radical, oppressive, anti-Semitic, and anti-Western marches, parades, and even domestic terror attempts.
Okay, thanks, Hans Zimmer. Let's go. Anyway. See, I don't trust them to give me an accurate representation of what the entire protest movement is like. But, you know, I don't think I'm going to get that. The day I get blocked from this chat, I will ascend to peace. I'll keep you longer then. Fuck you.